What will happen to this city during World War I? After centuries of growth and expansion, our city has now entered the 20th century, bringing new technologies and new challenges. Planes will take to the sky, metros tunnel underground, and dreadnoughts dominate the seas. And what were they used for? War. Specifically, a very great war. Must be an ironic name or something. But how do we shape a city entering World War I? And what was life like before it? Let's find out. This is episode 4 of my Historical Skylines series.
Hello there.
Where we take a single city all the way from the medieval age into the future, shaping it with real-world history along the way. If you've missed the earlier videos, there's a full playlist you can go back and watch. But today, we're picking up around 1900, during the Belle Epoque. It overlaps with the late Victorian era, but cities were growing faster and building bigger than ever. Population surged, and the response was wide boulevards, monumental stations, museums, universities, and large public parks. Architecture used neoclassical, Beaux-Arts, and Art Nouveau styles, while industry pushed ahead with new factories, dense worker housing, and large naval bases to project power overseas. But all of that progress would have to contend with the First World War. Cities in Europe now had to think about aerial attacks, unrestricted submarine warfare, and the conversion to a war economy. Forts appeared off coastlines, planes took off from muddy fields, and fires revealed just how vulnerable modern cities could be. As always, a new video means new changes to the rules. Cars are no longer forbidden. Our gravel roads will now start getting paved over to handle motorised traffic. Railways and trams are already established by now, and some metro systems were already up and running, so we might have to build one of our own. Our palette of buildings has got more diverse as well, as globalization has increased the spread of ideas, styles, and building materials. The global population also roughly doubled during the Belle Epoque, so we're going to need to do a lot of building to keep up. Those were the rules. I've got a lot to do today. Let's get building. Before we could start on any new builds, I wanted to go back over the city and make some small changes here and there. First up was upgrading the road network, from these stupid, crummy gravel roads to these sexy, delicious alley roads. Sadly, we can't have fully tarmacked highways just yet, not until the 1920s at least. So until then, we'll be using the alleys as cobblestone roads, and I'll be upgrading the gravel roads whenever I come across them. Speaking of road networks, I want to build some bridges from Newport across the river over here to the west bank. Perhaps we should find another name for this area. I thought about putting it in a few different places, but I wanted to keep it high up enough so that boats could still pass underneath. But the perfect spot was right in front of me. This road next to the tram depot, which I could raise up to the perfect height. With the road bridge in place, I also want to build some pedestrian bridges. Something like this. Now all I need to do is connect it up. So I made a ramp going up and added some quaysides to the path to make it look like it was built in stone. My main focus for this chapter though was planning out the new districts that we're going to build for this era. To the west of Newport, in this big open bay area, I wanted to build a sprawling metropolis, using a lot of the themes and features of this time. First being these wide boulevards, designed to handle increased road traffic, and I'm going to use them as my arterial roads. For the layout of this area, a big inspiration was Paris, which has a lot of these wide boulevards and very dense buildings, but avoids looking too gritty thanks to all these diagonal intersecting roads. Anyway, to give me something to build around, I thought I'd start with the train station, which would be a focal point for this area. That does mean I'm going to have to build some more rails, but please don't shout at me, I'm doing my best. I used another historic central station and connected it all up. And the next thing to do was add in the waterfronts to this city. I traced along the coast with pedestrian quays and spent ages raising them up out of the sea. Because it's on a river, they're not all at the same height. But it was worth it, it gave me something to connect all the other roads into. I should probably hook all of this up into the King's Road. So I made a bridge section and snuck the road underneath. But don't worry about this junction too much. When we build highways, we'll redo all of this road infrastructure. With the station connected up, something I thought fitting to add next was some kind of large central park. So that they'd still be functional, I used 2 multi-purpose parks and 2 campfire sites, and then surrounded them with more wide boulevards. This also gave me a way I could connect up the bridge we built, which I added tram lines to, and would connect up this park to the rest of the city. Next idea I had was to use some of these landmarks to create some kind of Capitol Hill or Reichstag building. I ended up deleting these later, so I won't go into any detail. However, this is a good excuse to talk about my other inspiration for this area, besides Paris, and it's actually the Northeast USA. Yes, I know, this is meant to be a European-inspired city, and it still is, but most of the Northeast assets did become popular around this time. Maybe in some parts of the city, there's communities of American expats, or maybe, by expanding the scope a bit and metaphorically zooming out, I can bring more variety and cover broader parts of 20th century history as we move forward. It would definitely mean I'd have more videos to make, but let me know what you think of that idea in the comments. Anyway, I built this awful looking road going up the hill, but don't worry about that. I did, however, get a chance to try out the road layout I want for this area, which would consist of lots of long, straight roads intersecting each other at varying angles. They would often all converge on a big roundabout as well. I'm not going to give you a play-by-play of every road I placed, because I placed a lot, but I'll try and show the broad themes, like wide boulevards, diagonal alleys, and then local roads to fill in the gaps, converging into roundabouts. I stopped when I was roughly in line with the station, because I thought this area would be a good place for our city's first university. Universities had existed for centuries at this point, but many popular universities were established at this time, like a lot of red brick unis in the UK, and in the US, most notably Johns Hopkins, Stanford, and the University of Chicago. For my uni, I used the base game one, and I added a park and 2 libraries around the back. Next, I wanted to expand our tram network, which was still all the rage back then. I laid a big loop going around this new area, running past the university and connecting back up to the Newport Bridge. And with a few more roads in and having fixed some ugly ones, I think this layout is finally starting to get somewhere. Finally, I connected up the rail line and the tram line, and finished off by upgrading some gravel roads into alleys. And now I think we are ready to get building. This is going to be a long chapter, where I work east to west, slowly building and detailing these new parts of the city. Starting with this area next to the river, in which I use some of these USA Northeast assets for the first time. There are some high-rise assets in this pack, which I'm not going to use today. I'm only interested in these mid-rise assets, and these big ones work great as large warehouses or commercial buildings. And then I had a chance to connect up the other sides of these bridges, which I ended up turning into the first of many park areas. This was also a good chance to get some city services down, so I placed some northeast schools, a hospital, a police station, and a fire station. I wanted to keep these areas of the city fairly walkable, so in odd spaces between buildings, I added paths and then decorated with trees. Hand placing buildings was going to get monotonous at some point, so I mixed it up by starting building in new areas. Like down here along the waterfront, I placed a row of these red-roofed French office buildings. But I'm going to leave this idea to stew for a bit and come back to it later, because I had a school to place and some more filler buildings. Most of these buildings are medium residential and office buildings, but occasionally I'd place a big static ploppable, then hide more office zoning inside. Coming back to the waterfront, and there was a crucial bit of infrastructure that I was keen to get down, and that was the ferry harbour. The base game one looked pretty cool, and not too out of place for this time period. But I thought this would be a good place for it, as it sat right in the middle of this new area, which would have quite a high population density. I hooked it up to our existing boat line that connects to the rest of the city, and then my mind moved to another city service that we haven't even placed so far. It's time we got a mail service going, which is currently the only thing majorly affecting our happiness. To fill all this space, we would need a lot of new citizens to move in, which might be tricky due to all the empty properties we have already. So I'm thinking if I keep them happy, it'll encourage them to move in. Modern mail systems were also getting popular around this time, with the first mailboxes appearing around 1850, and the first mail air services up and running by 1918. Anyway, that was fun, back to placing buildings. The Northeast pack has quite a good variety of medium buildings, and some smaller ones too, to fill in the gaps. I also experimented with some of these row houses, which worked quite well, and I finished off with some paths, some parks, and some trees. That method I ended up repeating many times, with the only interesting bit being these parks that I added. And eventually, my city looked like this, which I'm pretty happy with so far. Some of these buildings do spawn in some wacky colours, but I took care of most of those using recolor. After witnessing some very questionable boat driving, I feared that I'm getting a bit carried away with these American assets and want to tie this back into its roots somewhat. I was also desperate to use this grand hotel asset somewhere, and I thought I could use it as a centerpiece to a nice French-inspired district of the city. Right out front, I placed a large plaza park which bordered the water, and around the park I used a variety of these French assets to start filling the space. For these French blocks, I used a mix of actual French residential buildings and the static ploppable versions. I used these to fill in the gaps and hide the sides of these assets, which were often completely untextured. Before long, it was starting to come together, but I wanted some variety and some way to blend these assets into the rest of the area. Thankfully, the French low-rent residential were a perfect mix of the two styles, and I used them on the edge of this area. All that was left to do was fill in the middle, for which I used more of these French terraced assets, leaving space for the occasional park or path, and we're finally done. I condensed this chapter down a lot, and I'm sure you can imagine why. It took a lot of building to fill out this area so far, but I think it was worth it. There is still more I want to do here, so I'll come back to it later. But for now, I was ready to add some new infrastructure into this city. First on my infrastructure to-do list is another coal power plant. Except this one isn't a small coal power plant like the last one. This one is just a coal power plant. But it's not small. I promise it's big. It's just cold right now. I wanted to put it next to the old ones over in Coal Drop, so I removed this coal mine that didn't really make any sense and dug into the space to level it out a bit. I restrained from placing this thing last episode in the Industrial Revolution because of the distinctive cooling towers it has. This is technically called a hyperboloid cooling tower, and these were first popularised around 1918. But the reason they became popular is actually quite interesting. First of all, it's very structurally sound, as its concave shape helps to distribute the weight evenly. But also, as the steam rises up the cooling tower, it's funneled through this narrow bit. This increases the speed of the airflow, and that in turn will suck in air quicker from below, increasing the efficiency of ventilation. Thank you physics, very cool. Anyway, with the power station in place, I tidied it up a bit with some tree tailing, and then made a quick pit stop back in the new district to add in the new tram lines. I made a new line that went round in circles through the new district, and I coloured this one green, specifically a deep mossy green, as a nod to the trams of New Orleans, to reference the French and American influence in this area. Now for something I've been waiting for since this series began, a metro system. As a self-confessed metrosexual, I wanted to get this right, so let's take a quick detour for some history. The first metro was established back in 1863 in London, known as the Tube, and it initially ran using steam trains instead of electric trains like we use today. That's probably why the Tube is still so sooty today. Some lines, like the Northern Line, can leave you with sooty teeth, sooty eye boogers, and of course, sooty nose boogers as well. They also didn't tunnel very deep. In fact, they pioneered a technique known as cut and cover, where a shallow trench was dug on the surface, then they built the rail lines and covered it back over. Some of these tunnels are still in use today, and in some buildings you can still hear the trains from the surface. And let me tell you, it can make for quite a startling experience when you're enjoying a nice relaxing poo in the downstairs toilet of an all-bar one, and all of a sudden it sounds like an A380 is taking off. Sadly though, tunnels don't work very well near the surface in this game. It will be ugly and glitchy and extremely frustrating. Sounds like my content. So instead, we'll be building a proper metro with deep tunnels, which was also first pioneered in London in the 1890s. Before any of that though, we need to get a subway yard, so we can actually have trains for the metro. I decided to go for this area, between the railway and the Capitol Hill, which you'll notice I deleted the landmarks and the ugly road, so you can put away your pitchforks and rejoice. I started with an alley road running parallel to the railway, and then cleared out a flat space for the subway yard. And with that down, next we need the tunnel entrances. So for this, I lowered 2 metro rails under the ground, and then added retaining walls to each sides. Unfortunately, retaining walls always seem to just cause lighting errors in this game. Even if the road only has a retaining wall on one side, its shadows will act as if it has 2. Like here for example. One of these shadows would make sense if the sun was at a low angle, but that would leave the other side equally well lit. Anyway, I added some surfaces, and then I was on the hunt for some props to decorate. I thought this would be a good place for a recycling centre, not used as a recycling centre, but simply because some of our citizens have been moaning about garbage collection for at least 600 years at this point, so we probably owe it to them. And I'll come back and blend this into the subway yard later. At the mouth of the tunnel, I used some pillars to make my own little retaining wall, and then used some small buildings and train carriage props to fill in the space, then followed up with a couple of warehouses and a taxi depot, which we haven't actually placed yet. Taxi services had been around for a while at this point, with horse-drawn carriages for hire appearing in London as early as 1605. The first motorised taxi service began in Stuttgart, and that was all the way back in 1897, then quickly spread to Paris, London and New York by 1903. The ones we get in game, the famous New York yellow taxis, were first introduced in 1907, and was the world's first large-scale modern taxi fleet. The next step was some trees, and I mean a lot of trees, as I want this to look a bit run down or unkept. I also found some station platform assets which work quite well, and finished off with a variety of surfaces, more trees, and some dirt decals as well. And with that in place, now we need to decide where our station and tunnels are going to go. The central train station that we used also has a subway interface, so it would be rude not to use that, and that lined up nicely with the Grand Hotel Square, so I added one there too. Unfortunately, that tunnel would be a dead end as it leads out to sea, so I made a junction and continued the tunnel going east, adding a station into the heart of this new district, and another one in Newton, near the tram and overground lines. Next, I want to get a line serving this side of the city, perhaps connecting Welly Terraces, Plough End and Watermark. So I added in the tunnels and the station, and I'm going to be using this station in Greyfair as a kind of interchange between the two lines. So now we have the Welly Watermark line, the Greyfair Downtown line, and then the station to Grand Hotel line as well. These are all placeholder names, and I'm definitely not going to be calling anywhere downtown, but I thought it would be cool to see if you guys have any cool ideas for the names of these lines. You might want to wait till the end of the video when I've decided on the district names, but let me know in the comments if you have any cool ideas. With the metro line up and running finally, the last thing on my to-do list for this chapter is revisit the castle, which we've barely touched since it was built. I don't want to do too much, especially since these German residential buildings I used are actually only just becoming historically appropriate for this period. I just wanted to tidy up the land use a bit, to reflect that this castle was no longer militarily significant, and instead would become a popular tourist destination. I'm going to leave the town area, but inside the castle grounds, I want to make this a proper tourist trap. For this, I found these German mixed-use buildings, still in the same style as the rest of the town, but just shorter and more compact. And I used them to make a bunch of these little housing blocks with the occasional public squares, which really helped to add density to this area. And for the inside of the castle, well, if you thought the outer walls was a tourist trap, well, this is going to be a tourist death trap. Complete with windy roads, dead ends, quaint little mum and pop shops, and lots of overpriced knickknacks. I know what I'm getting my family for Christmas. That reminds me actually, when I was in the shower the other day, I had an idea to make a flag for this city. So I gave it a go, and this is what I came up with. I took inspiration from Estonia's flag, which is meant to represent the landscape of the country, and usually consists of the blue sky, the black forests, and the white snow. So instead, in Skylenberg, we have the blue ocean, the green land, and then the white snowy mountains. And of course, a castle in the middle. Anyway, with the tourist trap done, and the heraldry nerdiness done, the last thing I want to add is another way into the castle. Sieges are a thing of the past. Warfare has moved a bit further afield. So to account for all this new footfall in this area, I added a couple of new roads into the castle, and then connected them up to Welly Terraces. Speaking of warfare, let's take a quick look at how naval warfare would have changed this city. You might think I'm about to build a port that exports butter, but no, sorry to disappoint. But I am in fact returning back to Butter Island that we built in the last video, and some of you guys had some great suggestions for the lore of this island's name, particularly the one about General John James Butter, that cracked me up. But I think the most fitting story is that the fort on the island was once under siege for months on end, and the fort's garrison survived by eating copious amounts of butter. Perhaps that's all this island had because of the local dairy farms. How many different ways can you even eat butter? Anyway, enough about butter, because I'm supposed to be talking about the new port that I'm building, and that I'm naming Butterport. This will be quite similar to Gun Wharf that we built last time, except on a much larger scale, because this port needs to handle a little someone known as HMS Dreadnought. That's right, we're talking about one of the most historically important warships ever built, that changed the entire course of naval warfare. The 1906 HMS Dreadnought was not the first of her name, nor was she Queen of the Andals, the Roynar, or the First Men. In fact, there were 5 other dreadnoughts dating back to 1553. But the most famous one is of course the 1906 model, which made every previous battleship obsolete overnight, and immediately triggered an arms race. This was so significant that historians distinguish between the pre-dreadnought era and the dreadnought era. To put that into perspective, the only other time we do that as a species was with Jesus, because we got BC and AD. So what's so special about HMS Dreadnought anyway, I hear you ask, sarcastically. Well, she was the first battleship to only have large guns, giving her unmatched long-range firepower. She was also the first ship to use steam turbines instead of piston engines, making her a lot quicker. Essentially, she outmatched her competitors in just about every way except for maneuverability. Not only did she change naval warfare, but she also changed naval infrastructure too. Dockyards now had to be wider, deeper and stronger to handle these larger ships, leaving many old ports obsolete. They would also need large industrial areas for advanced manufacturing, and some kind of barracks for soldiers and sailors. Once again, I'm taking inspiration from a real-life Royal Navy dockyard, which had started using large basins instead of individual docks to handle a lot of large ships at once. This area also overlaps with the prison that's on this island, but it actually works quite well as part of this build. Perhaps it's the Admiralty office or the naval headquarters, and next to it I had an idea to try and build a bit of a warehouse used for shipbuilding. For this I used the Dairy House static ploppable, 4 in fact, and then out the front I made some large slipways leading out of the warehouse. This was extremely fiddly, in fact, dare I say, supremely fiddly, but I think it worked out in the end. Now, for the surrounding area, I used the ground earth signature building as maybe some kind of fuel refining site, and then some more roads and buildings and surfaces. And also stopped to add in some barracks. These are the Eastern Europe residentials. But my favourite touch to this area was actually the cargo cranes. I'm surprised we're even able to place this, to be honest, but I'm glad we are. And I know it doesn't make a huge amount of sense how I placed it. Please don't overthink it. I'm simply just following the rule of cool. Final touches were of course some surfaces and smaller buildings, and the last thing I want to do here is add a small residential village. Perhaps this is where the naval officers live when they're not at sea. For this village, I'm actually following my own guide on building British villages, which should be on your screen now. The basic components are a village green, a church, and a pub. And after some time, you should end up with something like this. I think this area came together pretty well. I think this port looks distinct enough from Gun Wharf, and this village would actually be a pretty cool place to live. Before we wrap up this chapter, I had to play around with some of the spawners that we've got, specifically the boat spawner, which funny enough, spawns boats, that then poot around the bay aimlessly. With the only demand we've got being for industrial buildings, I think we should get some more down, and perhaps finish building this new part of the city. Unfortunately, I'm running out of storage space again, so I started doing some building off camera. Like this small industrial estate that I built around the subway yard, and this was actually the first buildings that I haven't hand placed in this city. I used the zoning tool to build them, which I kind of regret. I probably should have placed some more large buildings in here. Also, I've got a question for you guys. I record all my gameplay in 4K resolution at 120Hz, which is probably why I'm always running out of storage space. But can you guys actually tell the difference? And what resolution do you usually watch in? I'm tempted to drop down to 1440, but let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, in this chapter, I wanted to finish off this new part of the city and add some finishing touches as well, before our city reaches the end of the Belle Epoque. Belle Epoque literally means beautiful age in French, and was named retroactively due to the horrors of the years that followed it. But until we reach that, we're still in the land of sunshine and rainbows. So let's get building some more nice parts of the city. Starting with an extension to this French district, where I made a few more terraces, and once again decorated with trees, parks and surfaces. Jumping ahead again to where I'd finished another few blocks. This time I was using the French low rent residential, coupled with some northeast schools, to create sort of an extension to the university campus. Perhaps this was student accommodation, or different faculties of the university. I also used some row houses and also placed the central bank building right on the high street opposite the central park. And this gave me an idea to place an even bigger building, the National Gallery of Art, which I'd tried to place earlier, but this looks like a much better place for it, and the style of it really fit the look we're going for. For the area behind the gallery, I wasn't sure what to put here, so I procrastinated by extending our tram line to this new part of the city, then switched it back to green, of course. And with a bit more procrastinating done, and I bit the bullet and started placing things, and found myself crawling back to the old reliable, the Neo Barracks. I used it with the Forum of Arts to create a cool little area, and felt confident enough to give this area the old boop treatment. Boop! I used some more of the northeast row houses and medium buildings, and I think this side of the city came out well in the end. I quite like the idea of leaving Capitol Hill empty. Maybe we could add some trails and turn it into a nature reserve. Speaking of nature, my next idea concerns the vast rolling hills located north of this new district. Because all this population would need feeding, and the city would require a constant supply of food, whether locally or imported. So I thought I'd build some more farmland in this space we're not currently using. We can always build over it in future if we need. My method here involved a huge agriculture surface covering the whole area, then used tree lines to divide up the land and create hedgerows. I wanted to keep an irregular pattern to the hedgerows, as if the boundaries were organically changed over time, and the next step was to create some different colours to each field, as it would be unlikely that they were all growing the same crops, or that they all had the same soil composition. To do this, I added forestry surfaces to some of the fields, and a variety of riverbed surfaces over the other fields, and ended up with this. I also added a lot more trees into the foothills, and finally, our major building project for this video is done, which I can't lie is a relief. I was a bit concerned as I was building it that this new area wouldn't fit in, but now it's done, I think it works. And we got a chance to get lots of new services into the city as well. Thanks to our new mail system in the city, I read the morning paper this morning, and there was a very troubling headline saying that Archduke Franz Ferdinand has been assassinated in Sarajevo, triggering a diplomatic meltdown as Austria declares war on Serbia, Russia mobilizes in response, Germany backs Austria, France sides with Russia, and Germany invades neutral Belgium, prompting Britain to declare war, and kicking off what some historians are calling the Great War. By dinner time on the 28th of July 1914, the majority of European countries were now at war. Within a matter of weeks, life in European cities had completely transformed. Governments imposed curfews, rationing and censorship, while factories shifted from civilian to military production. Cities swelled with both troops and displaced civilians, straining housing, sanitation and transport. Railways were expanded and prioritised for moving men, weapons and supplies, while ports and airfields grew into vital hubs for logistics as well as supporting military operations. Similarly, anti-aircraft batteries and searchlights were built near key cities to counter enemy aircraft, while coastal forts and artillery were established to protect ports and naval bases from long-range naval attacks. By 1916, all the major powers had mandatory conscription, with around 1 in 4 European men being conscripted. France even called up 100% of eligible French men, and that was back in 1914, so really no one is safe. Especially you, randomly selected citizen. Anyway, let's talk about bombing, because that's the first thing I want to simulate in this city. In World War I, bombing was very much in its infancy. Planes were slow and clunky and weak, and their payloads were nothing compared to World War II. They could still blow up your roof or start a fire, but not enough to demolish whole blocks. So I'm returning back to the trusty dev mode, and I'm going to start a bunch of fires and see what comes of it. The first one I saw was in this new district, but unluckily for the bombers, we've actually got a great fire service in this city now. And the next one I saw was in the subway yard, but my sexy firemen were already on it, and by the time I'd zoomed out, all the fires were already taken care of. That was a bit underwhelming, but I guess it's probably quite accurate. Planes' best use in World War I was as reconnaissance, and most bombing efforts were quite primitive and lacking in range, accuracy and payload. However, another mode of transport that was in its prime during this time was rails. Railways could be used to deploy an enormous amount of men, weapons and supplies across vast distances. They often form the backbone of World War I supply lines, allowing armies to sustain operations far from home bases. And without them, trench warfare and major offensives would have been impossible. To represent that in-game, I thought I could add a cargo terminal, which obviously has a useful in-game purpose, but could easily work as a mustering ground or a logistics yard to support the war effort. This one I placed in the far west of the city, next to the subway yard, and this one would connect up to the western border of the map. I also added some storage warehouses nearby, then blended it into the surrounding area. We've definitely got space for another cargo terminal. This is a world war after all, so I found a place for a second one over here in Gun Wharf. Next idea I had was to build some floating sea forts. These are a real thing if you've never seen them. There are some protecting Portsmouth, which we've talked about previously in this series, although Portsmouth's sea forts would have been around for about 40 years at this point, but they probably still would have been used for defence, so I think we can get away with it. For my sea forts, I started out with a hexagon of pedestrian roads out in the bay, because as you may very well know, hexagons are the bestigons. Then I filled in the inside and added a grey surface to the bottom, and finished off with another tower in the middle made of pedestrian paths. It was so nice that I made it twice. I'm not dead set on the look of them up close, but then again, the game doesn't really give me many options, and we're mainly going to see them from afar anyway, so I'm happy with it for the moment. Now then, after our city has been tickled with bombs for the first time, there's a growing sentiment to build an air force of our own. Most air forces started life as a branch of either the army or the navy, and was basically just an experimental form of reconnaissance. And we would certainly need somewhere to conduct these experiments and train our own pilots, and that's why I'm clearing out this flat area in the east of the city. This field is close to both of our naval bases, so let's assume this is a naval air service for now. It's also sheltered from view of the sea, so it's a bit safer from naval attacks. I built a hangar facility with a few large buildings and some roads, and then started tracing out some of the runways into the grass. I used gravel roads for this, but in reality, most planes were taking off from the grass itself, but I thought the gravel roads added a bit more detail, so let me off. Then I went over it with some surfaces, leaving our finished airfield looking like this. I still feel like it's missing something, but I'm sure we can add to it in the next video. For now though, I'm ready for the finishing touch, adding district names. But first, while I've got your attention, I just wanted to say sorry for the delay on this video. I've picked up some extra part-time work recently, which is eating way too much of my time. However, if you want to help me make videos full-time, I do have a channel membership you can check out if you're interested. Or if you're a cheapskate, I'll settle for a like on the video. And if you hate me and think I'm smelly, do your worst in the comments. Anyway, as usual, we're going to wrap up with some district names. Starting with Butter Island, which is still Butter Island, just a bit bigger. I also expanded Gun Wharf to include the cargo terminal, but not the airfield. Next, we're over to the French-inspired waterfront districts, and for this I went with Belmarsh. In French, it actually means beautiful market, and I went with it because of the ornate look of these buildings, but it's also a nod to the beautiful age that it was built in. Moving over to the more Northeast American inspired area, rail obviously referring to the rail line adjacent to this area, and a ford is another word for a river crossing. So perhaps this name was given by the people of Newton because this area was where the rail crossed the river. For the area including the university, the station and the central park, I named this area Marblegate, as there was at least one way out of the city over here, and a lot of the buildings, like the art gallery, were built in a neoclassical style using lots of marble facades. The final new district I named Tunnelhead, which encompasses this whole industrial district, also including the subway yard and its tunnel. And that's it, another era down. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you had, then drop your boy a like, and I'll see you next time where we're exploring the Second World War.